Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to begin the lecture. This is the beginning of the whole course. Consists of 6 topics. As the title shows, this is an introduction to China. But this is neither the tourist guide type of introduction, nor the official document with a comprehensive account of China's history, geography, economy, population, etc. No. This is an introduction by a scholar. We call it a private approach. The approach of a professor of communication, culture, and the media. To understand China, you should first understand the people. To understand the people, you should first understand the culture that shapes the thinking and the way of their life. Since I intend to present to you a real China from the communication perspective, I should first explain what is communication. One of the best-known definitions is communication creates what we call reality. As Walter Lippmann, the American writer, says, man has to learn about vast portions of the world that he could never see, touch, smell, hear, or remember. He has to form a trustworthy picture of the world beyond his reach. Our opinions have to be pieced together out of what others have depicted. That is what we call reality. Another problem is that we do not first see and then define. We first define and then see. People tend to see the familiar stereotypes formed by their own culture. Therefore, people from out of China could learn more from the Chinese perspective, from the Chinese media, old and new, from the way Chinese live, work, and communicate. Then the Chinese pieces, the seemingly random pieces, can be put together to form a more trustworthy picture of China. In the following lectures, I'm going to talk about how we Chinese eat, how we share food, how we pursue happiness, and how we perceive our history and society, how we would like to be seen by the outside world, and how we communicate with ourselves and with people from other cultures. So all these belong to the same topic, the big topic. The title of this course is To Understand China, Understanding China. Okay, now I'll begin. The title, as you can see here, is Peking University and Contemporary China. I'll show you 3 photos. The Great War. The second view is the Beacon Towers. Another view of the war. The Beacon Tower in Chinese is 烽火台. Did I take the wrong pictures to you? Was it a tourist commercial? Of course not. Why do I show you these pictures? Why do I show you the pictures of the Great War? Because I've got a topic, a very big topic, that is contemporary Chinese history, politics, and society. I was asked to finish this topic within 2 or 3 hours. That is a mission impossible. If you look at the Great War, the Long War, on top of certain beacon towers, like I showed you just now. From one of the beacon towers, you can have a better view of the whole wall because you are standing higher. And I think if I compare the contemporary Chinese history to the Great Wall, a very long wall, miles after miles, from one of those beacon towers, you can have a better view of the Great Wall. And the Peking University is one of those beacon towers. On top of that, from there, you can have a good view of the whole contemporary Chinese history. That's why I showed you the pictures of the Great Wall. Hope you understand. So an outline for this topic is how was Beida founded? And second is the role of Beida in modern Chinese history. Beida is the short form for Peking University, or Beijing Daxue in Chinese. Okay, let's go back to the year when Peking University was founded. Now I have a question for you. Is Beida the oldest university in China? Can anyone answer? You don't have to stand up. Okay, please.
Yes, of course.
Yes, of course. How old is Peking University?
Since 1898.
1898, so 100 and some 20 years or so. Okay. So, thank you very much. So, Beida was founded about 100 and some 20 years ago. So let's go back to the historical period of China at that time when Beida was founded. I'm going to talk about two wars. There were two wars fought between China and a foreign country. The first one is the 1840, beginning from 1840, a war between China and Britain. The second war is half a century after that, between China and its neighbor Japan in 1894. And the result of the two wars is a treaty between the two nations. We call that a humiliating defeat. Okay, let's look at the first war. It's called the Opium War. That's between 1840 to 1842. The war was fought between China and Britain, and at that time, the army for China is 800,000. We have the biggest regular army in the world, the biggest in number. But it was said that in Britain, their armed force is just 20,000. The balance is 20,000 versus 800,000. Yet, we were defeated. This picture showed, I think it's a drawing, showed what the invaders did when they entered the city. Of course, they killed, they raped, they robbed, and so on. Why were we defeated? With such a big army in the world, we were badly defeated by the British invaders. Why? Among the many reasons, the one that we have very old-fashioned troops. The weaponry we had at that time, it is said, was 200 years behind that of the British. This picture shows how the Chinese general reviewed the army. You can see the long knives and the old-fashioned weapons. It seems like a family business with the general and probably his wife or his parents. The balance is 1 versus 40. 1 is the British side, the 40 is the Qing dynasty, is the Chinese side. We seemed to be very powerful, but we were defeated. And then the result is the treaty between China and Britain. We call that the Nanjing Treaty. On board the ship, the fleet of the British. In August 1842, in Nanjing, this treaty was signed. According to the records of the historian, the so-called negotiation between China and Britain, people, the delegates from the two sides, talked about nothing but the music, weapons, new weapons, candies, etc., the nonsense. Nothing was mentioned about the content of the treaty itself. Why was that? Why didn't anyone mention it, mention the content? Why didn't they really negotiate? The answer is very certain, is that the Chinese side did not have any say. As we can see in the Nanjing Treaty, the famous Nanjing Treaty, the content includes the cession of Hong Kong, and the so-called war indemnity was paid to the British side. That is 16 million taels of silver. We do not know how much is that. 16 million taels of silver. It is clear to say that that amount of money is 1/3 of the annual revenue of the whole country in China. 1/3 of that was asked to be paid for the loss of the invaders from Britain. The picture shows how the carts were used to carry the silver, tons of silver, to the British side to pay. And it is said when the news came from Nanjing all the way to Beijing, when Emperor Daoguang saw this report of the treaty, he wrote with a red ink pen in Chinese, 奈何,奈何, that's his comment. 奈何,奈何, here come in, oh my God. He had nothing to say. The Nanjing Treaty shocked not the Chinese, but the Japanese. Why were the Japanese shocked? Can anyone answer this question? The British invaded China, but the Japanese were shocked by the defeat of the Chinese. Yes, the reply is that because Japan, for centuries, for a long time, Japan took China as their major teacher. They learned a lot of things from us, the culture, the language, the characters. They borrowed characters from us, even many festivals. were like ours. But now, this great teacher was badly defeated with such a balance of the military power, unequal balance. So people in Japan began to think, should we have other teachers instead of the Chinese? And a decade after the invasion, the British invasion to China, the United States sent a fleet led by Matthew Perry. He led the fleet to knock open the closed door of Japan and did the same thing as the British did to China a decade ago. Of course, they defeated the Japanese, and the Japanese had to accept the unequal treaty between Japan and the United States. But at the same time, they decided to learn from the invaders, to wage a major reform in the country, to strengthen Japan as a nation. About half a century after the invasion of the United States, Japanese really learned from their teachers. They invaded China in the year 1894 and forced China to sign an unequal treaty between China and Japan, the Treaty of Shimonoseki, in Chinese 马关条约. In that treaty, they asked more money from us compared with the British. It is said that they asked 13 times the so-called war indemnity, the amount of money, 13 times that of the British, stated in the Nanjing Treaty. The Treaty of Shimonoseki, they asked for 200 million taels of silver, and also the cession of Taiwan. That's how Taiwan and Hong Kong occupied by a foreign country. Now, please look at the two figures, 2.5 and 1/6. The meaning of the two figures. Can you make a guess? Okay, 2.5 refers to the money. In the Treaty of Shimonoseki, we were asked to pay the war indemnity of the amount of 200 million taels of silver. How much is that? It is 2.5 the annual revenue, the income of the whole year of the nation. You pay everything, every single coin to them, it is still not enough. 2.5 times the money we earn in China, the total revenue. And 1/6 is about the territory. We had another bad neighbor to the north, that is Russia, the Tsarist Russia. By the time when we were defeated by a lot of invaders, the Russian Tsar, the Emperor of Russia, they invaded China, defeated us from time to time, and they grabbed the territory from us. That amount of territory was 1/6 of today's China. So the figures 2.5 and 1/6 shows how weak China was at that time, how weak China was before Peking University was founded. the historical background of the founding of the Peking University. Now here is a picture showing us a cowboy. This cowboy is a real cowboy, not like the American movies. In the movies, the cowboy. The story goes like this: that Confucius once he took the students to have fun, to go sightseeing in the suburbs. They came to a place called Canglang River, Canglang He. They saw a cowboy like this, riding a cow and singing to himself a song. In English, it means, when the river of Canglang, the water of Canglang, is clear, my children, my students, when the water is clear, he will wash his cap string, the cap. And when the water is muddy, he will wash his feet with it. This different application is brought by the water on itself. A man must first despise himself, and then others will despise him. A family must first destroy itself, and then others will destroy it. A state must first smite itself, and then others will smite it. This is illustrated in the passage of Tai Jia, still older classic. When heaven sends down calamities, it is still possible to escape. When we occasion the calamities ourselves, it is not possible any longer to live. So Confucius was teaching us to find reasons in yourselves when you made mistakes, when you face disasters. This text was taken from Mencius. And after we were defeated by the Japanese badly, many Chinese, especially the intellectuals of that time, they rose up. They began to raise criticism and raise demands. They would like to talk to the government leaders of that time. Remember, that is the Qing dynasty. The whole China was ruled by the emperor. And Kang Youwei, Mr. Kang Youwei, one of the candidates in Chinese is 举人, candidates for the imperial examination. Mr. Kang Youwei, he contacted a lot of friends and fellow candidates from all over China to gather together to sign a petition. The painting shows how they discussed and wrote that petition, meant to be sent to the emperor. And they lined there to sign this petition. And in that petition, they asked the government, led by the emperor, to refuse to sign the treaty between China and Japan, the Shimonoseki Treaty. And the second demand is that to move the capital of China from Beijing to elsewhere, to a safer place. The third is to carry out a major reform for China in order to strengthen the country. That's the three demands. And then came the famous 100-day reform. In Chinese, it is 戊戌变法. The 100-day reform. What were proposed for this reform, lasting from June to September that year? Who was leading this reform? The Emperor Guangxu. He was supposed to be the highest leader of the country. So he himself authorized the reform projects. He appointed the reformers, the reform-oriented people, mostly scholars, intellectuals, as the ministers for the new government, to carry out political, economic, and cultural reforms, to set up offices, to manage industry, the budget, finance in the central government, to allow the private-owned newspapers, to reform the army, the military force of China, to turn the ancestral temples into schools for the education of more people in China, and to send students abroad, to set up translation bureaus to translate works from foreign countries. Here is a picture showing the emperor. This is Guangxu, the emperor. He's young, in his 30s. This picture shows. And then on the left side is the person in real power of China, controlling the whole politics in China. She has been in that position for quite a long time, long before Guangxu the emperor. Is she the mother of the emperor? No, she is the sister of the mother. So she is the aunt of Guangxu. And she handpicked Guangxu to be the emperor when he was just a child. Since he's 5 or 6 years old, he became the emperor. Why? Because he's a child. He has to listen to the aunt. So the aunt herself is still in control. She is called in English the Empress Dowager, Cixi. She was the real person ruling China. We call that a rule from behind the curtains. And at first, the Emperor Guangxu himself, he studied English and foreign languages. He had friends and teachers from foreign countries. And he was, of course, quite influenced by the views of the Western people. So he himself was very much determined to have a major reform to strengthen the Qing dynasty. But he had to ask permission from the real ruler, that is Cixi. According to history, Cixi said, okay, I agree, do whatever you can. You are the real ruler. Now, you are a grown-up. And then the emperor began to carry out the reform measures. But later, Empress Dowager Cixi found out that she did not like the reform. It hurt the privileges held by people, by the classes represented by the Empress Dowager. And after about 100 days of the reform, she ordered that the emperor and those responsible for the reform were arrested, imprisoned, or executed, killed. 6 of those people arrested by the Chinese government, by the Qing dynasty, were the most famous, headed by Tan Sitong. They were very young, in the 30s and 40s. One of the measures for the reform, of the 100-day reform, was to set up a university, because the Chinese education was so old-fashioned. We had a certain kind of school. It's a private school. In Chinese, it's 私塾. This picture shows the school. This 1-to-1 teaching pattern. You can see that only the rich families can afford such kind of education. Another picture shows they have more people here, the rich families, the cousins and children of the relatives came to study here. A very small scale schooling here. The orientation for the Chinese education was for the 科举 imperial examination. Imperial examination was an invention by the Chinese for the selection of civil servants, for officials at all levels. Anyone can apply. So the school, the purpose of the schools, the training for students to go to the exams at all levels. And the final phase of that is to be in the capital, in Beijing, like Mr. Kang Youwei. And the best scored students would have a chance to be interviewed by the emperor himself. And then if they succeed, then they can be offered posts in the government. They can become officials. So that kind of education was not good, according to the reformers, because what was taught was nothing modern. What was taught was only writing articles, the classics, the poems, Confucius, Mencius, and how to advise the emperors, how to help them to rule the country. It is not what we want. We would like to have a modernized kind of education. So the reformers asked for the abolition of the imperial examination, and to set up a new school. On July the 4th, 1898, the emperor, during that reform movement, the emperor ordered that the Metropolitan University, 京师大学堂, Metropolitan University was set up. That was the first university of the modern style, sponsored by the central government of China. Another English name for this university is the Imperial University of Peking. That's the English translation. So there was the history of the university from Metropolitan University to Beida or Peking University to the contemporary day, to today's Peking University. We see the pictures here. This is easy to be recognized. This is the western gate of our campus. And the original Peking University, the campus was downtown. From Peking Metropolitan University to Peking University, Beida. A year after the Metropolitan University, the name of the university was changed into Peking University. Why do we say Peking University instead of Beijing University? Because Peking is the translation of the place Beijing in the old days. Because of the so-called phonetic system of the Wade-Giles system. Peking, Nanjing is Nanking. So Peking University. Why do we still use that today? Because there are many Beijing universities in Beijing, dozens of universities, and we are the only university that is called 北京大学 or Peking University. So we still keep that official English translation as Peking University instead of Beijing University. Okay. It moved from downtown to this campus in the year 1952 after the Communist Party came to power in China. Okay, let's look at the new policies for this university. 中学为体，西学为用, taking Chinese learning as the core and making use of Western learning and combining the truths of them both, of the West and the East. What is important is for the courses that were taught for the new university, Peking University. According to the records, in 1910, we had 8 divisions of Peking University. 8 divisions. The first is classics. That's the teaching of the classics of Confucius, Mencius, Zhuangzi, and philosophy, and the documents from the past, etc. That's called classics. The second is liberal arts. Again, the study of the language, the study of literature, of history, and philosophy, etc. That's for the liberal arts. And then we have the section, the division of law and the politics. That is something new. And then the division of the study of medicine. And then the division of natural sciences, including physics, chemistry, etc. The division of agriculture. Division of engineering. And the division of commerce. So the 8 divisions, for the first time in a university run by the Chinese, these new courses were taught. Something very new from this curriculum of the schools in the past in China. And in 1904, for the first time, Peking University sent 47 students to study abroad. Okay, that's the end of the first part of the topic.